In Jesus' name, amen. If you're not aware of where we are in the story, Jacob and Esau are two brothers. Jacob has hijacked from Esau both a blessing and a birthright. And so Esau decides he's going to kill him. And so Jacob flees under the advice of his mom to go to where she is from, Rebekah, Haran that you can see there. It's also where Abraham is from. It's his people. And so he is making a trek towards where Abraham had left, essentially. And that's going to be important for our story. Verse 10 says this: Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran, and he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. So it seems to be he just stopped where he was because the sun had set, and that's the point in his journey. But it says, taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. So as he's on his way to go where Abraham has come from, it seems almost accidental that he's there. Now, him being on the run, we find often, from Elijah to Jesus himself, Moses, God meets people in wilderness kind of environments. And that's the spot that he is in. What I want you to see, though, is in verses 10 and 11, there's a word that's used here, and it's more prominent in Hebrew, but I'm going to say it in English and emphasize the word to notice that we're to kind of perk up our ears because of this. It's just really in verse 11. And he says, and he came to a certain place and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. There's going to be something unique in the story we're about to read that is coming up redundantly, this place that he is in. So he falls asleep on a stone, which seems uncomfortable. Verse 12, and he dreams, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and atop of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, this is verse 15, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I've done all that I've promised you. So he lays down and he gets this image. This is the first time God is going to speak with Jacob. He's already spoken with Abraham and Isaac. We get this image of this ladder that is going back and forth. And the word that's used is ladder here. It could be a staircase. It's a way to go kind of back and forth or up and down. And so there's this ladder between heaven and earth. Angels are ascending and descending on it, and the Lord is standing above it. And it's from this vision that he declares to Jacob where he is, the same things that we've heard before. So you can see some of this stuff that's very common. There's a promise of land here, the offspring, there's the universal blessing. All of this is pretty common to what we heard. It's almost redundant, it feels like, to what we got with Abraham and also Isaac. There is a specific spot, though, where he says, and this is how John Goldingate translates it, he says, the earth that you're lying on, I will give to you and your offspring. He is leaving now what we understand as the territory of Israel on the run. He's leaving that place. Abraham came to it, and that's the promised land. So shouldn't he get it? Well, God is telling him, you're leaving this place, but don't worry, you will return, and you're going to have the very land that you're sleeping on right now. What I'd like you to do, if you can look at verse 15, though, there's a uniqueness again with emphasis. The emphasis that we see starts with a word or a statement that we are already familiar with, and it's in verse 15, I am with you. Now that was declared to Abraham. That was also declared in chapter 26, verse 24 to Isaac. The uniqueness of this is there seems to be, and I think we have reasons to believe that Jacob is at best still figuring out his relationship with God. Everything we know in the narrative so far, it is hard to believe that Jacob somehow is following the ways of Yahweh. God speaks directly to Abraham. He speaks to Isaac, but this time it's a dream. It's maybe one step removed is a way to say it. And so he doubles down on this promise that he's given to Abraham and Isaac, which God always refers to himself in past victories in the Old Testament. I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And so you can see here, he makes the same statement, I'm with you. But notice the emphasis. Then he goes on to say, and notice it's next, and I will keep you. That's a new promise. That wasn't Abraham and Isaac. And then he goes on to say, I will not leave you. There seems to be this emphasis on God's unconditional decision to be with Jacob. I'm with you. I'm going to keep you. You're going to come back to this land. I'm not going to leave you. I'm with you. Breathe. Okay? So here, that's the statement that God makes to Jacob. Jacob then responds. He wakes up from his sleep in verse 16. Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid, and he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, And this is the gate of heaven. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on top of it. This is a language of anointing. So he's laying on the stone. He wakes up. He recognizes how great this place is, and he starts to anoint the stone that he's laying on. Verse 19, and he called the name of that place Bethel, but the name of the city was Luz at the first, wherever you want to pronounce that. Now, this part's tricky. Jacob wakes up from his dream. And what is mysterious is Abraham in chapter 12, verse 8, you can look it up, is in Bethel when he's leaving Haran. He's leaving that place, and he sets up shop at minimum near where he is, if not exactly where Jacob is right now, and he builds an altar. Well, now here is Jacob going towards where Abraham left, and he's going to set up a pillar, and he's going to anoint it. And he seems to think of the vision that he has being distinct to the place where he is. And this is where it was tricky for me, because he uses this language of Bethel, which just means house of God or gate of God, as if that very place is where heaven and earth meet. Okay? Now, you might go, well, that's silly, but that seems to be what Jacob is doing. And from the rest of the story, Bethel, though mentioned second only to Jerusalem in the Old Testament, doesn't have a huge history of awesomeness for it being the house of God. As a matter of fact, Bethel is known for the most part moving forward. We'll find in chapter 31, he builds an altar in this place. God will actually revisit this situation. He'll say, I am the God of Bethel in chapter 31. But what we see is a lot of atrocities taking place in this moment. We see it in Kings, and there's a lot of worship of idols there. There's a human sacrifice there. It's just not a good place. Regardless, this seems to be special in this moment. And I was processing this. I don't know if it's the same when we say Jesus died for us on Calvary. Should we only think Calvary is the place we can receive salvation? That's kind of what I was going through in my mind. Is Jacob seeing this place in particular, as this is quite literally, if you go to Bethel, you just can't see it. There's a ladder there that connects heaven and earth. Or is he using analogous language here to explain something? That's kind of what's going on, at least in my mind as I was processing some of this. And we'll come back to Bethel in the coming chapters. Well, it says this, regardless of how you want to navigate it, he calls the place Bethel. It's the same place that Abraham was. He goes on to say in verse 20, then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, verse 21, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And the stone which I have set up as for a pillar shall be God's house, and all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. Now, just full disclosure, I think verses 20, 21, and 22 are wildly confusing, not for exegetical reasons, but if you've ever been in a conversation where you're talking with someone and you feel like we're clearly not talking about the same, we're just missing each other. So growing up in high school, and everyone in my generation before called the shirts that I'm wearing underneath this shirts, and I do not condone domestic violence, but it's called a wife beater. Okay, you're like, what? I don't know why. I don't know where it came from. Again, I do not condone domestic violence. Okay, but I'm driving with my family in the van, and I ask Candace, hey, can you order me some more wife beaters? And my daughter Eve says, Dad, what's a wife beater? And it was in that moment I realized that I don't know why it's called a wife beater. Outside, I assume because when I was younger, that's maybe people who beat their wives. I have no idea, okay? I'm not condoning the action. I'm just saying that's what I had called it. There was clearly a miscommunication of what was going on, and I began to question myself. Now, again, I'm not God in this text, but it feels like as I hear Jacob's response, my response if I was God would be, what? What are you talking about right now? And the reason being is Jacob's response seems to be almost antithetical to how God promises, meaning the emphasis in verse 15 was, I'm going to be with you. I'm with you. It seems to be absolutely unconditional language. Jacob has done nothing. We know that to be true. And Jacob's response is nothing but conditions. Look at it again in verse 20. Here it is. He makes this vow. And vows can be tricky because we talked about this in chapter 15. Vow could also be used synonymously with the language of covenant. But there's also a side of vows that could be separate from the idea of covenant, and that they are contractual in nature. As long as you do your part, I will do my part. We talked about that when we were in chapter 15. Well, here's Jacob telling God, though he's unconditionally promised to be with him, if God will be with me. And you can add the word if almost if you want to the rest of these elements. If God will be with me and if he'll keep me in the way that I go. You could add if he will give me bread to eat and if he'll give me clothing to wear so that I come again to my Father's house in peace then. As long as God, you do this, then I will do this. That feels like, what? What are you talking about right now? He goes, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house, and all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. This seems to be counter to what we're understanding here. Now, we're going to stop there because that's the end of the text, and we have so much of Jacob's life ahead of us. So there's going to be some topsy-turvy things that go on. So we got to cover a lot. So, the next 5 to 6 chapters are all going to be about Jacob. But we're going to stop there and really ask this question. Okay, that's curious. It ends there. That's the end of the chapter. There's this covenant made or this promise made by God as he stands on top of this ladder that connects heaven and earth. Jacob wakes up, says, this must be the place of God, and he makes a vow to God in responding that as long as you do what you're saying you're going to do, then I'm in. That's it. So what do we do with this? Now, here's how I think maybe the best way to process. Most of your guys' headings on this section, rightfully so, are called Jacob's ladder, or maybe Jacob's dream. The emphasis seems to be the uniqueness of this is not the interaction of Jacob and God, vows being made and promises being made, because that's been part of it. And again, the line and the thread that we need to continue to follow in Genesis is that's the major overarching tone that Jacob is in fact in the line of Abraham, that he will be in the people that God uses to redeem the world. That's all found in his loins. That's for sure. But then there's also this specific part of it of what do we do with this one part that's unique in that there's this random vision, this random moment where you like, why in all of this were we given this vision that Jacob has in this dream about a ladder connecting heaven and earth, angels ascending and descending on it, God standing on top of this ladder. So what I tried to do is, and I want to invite you into this space. I want you to imagine for a second that you are the original readers, the original audience of this text. And you're going through the book of Genesis as Moses is telling it to you, and you have to at least stop for a second and recognize that Genesis, over and over since the beginning of our story, has made this separation of heaven and earth, and your ears would perk up and go, wait a minute, there's a place that we can go that connects these two things? Since Genesis 3, it's been apart. There have been moments, for example, God coming down to see the Tower of Babel, or the angel of the Lord, or angels sent to Sodom and Gomorrah. There have been moments when heaven has interacted with earth, but man, it feels far off. It feels like we still recognize there's a clear distinction between heaven and earth. There's a clear distinction from us to God, and we recognize since Genesis 3, because we are so full of sin. We are so full of what took place in Genesis 3 of rebellion, and God seems to be so distinct from that there's no way there's a place called Bethel that has a ladder that connects those two worlds. There's no way that we can see, I can broach the heavenlies. That's not possible. As a matter of fact, the visions that come later in the Old Testament acknowledge this. You see it in the major prophets. For example, in Isaiah chapter 6, verses 4 through 7, Isaiah's famous vision where he sees the Lord and the angels. It says in verse 4, and the foundations of the threshold shook. I don't have this on the screen, so you just have to track with me. Shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And Isaiah says this about himself. And I said, woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Now, this is a familiar story. For most of us are aware, what's going on in Isaiah's mind is recognizing, I see cleanness, and I know who I am. I'm unclean. We do not jive together. There is a separation between the heavens and the earth. There's a separation between God and me. Or in Ezekiel, another major prophet who has multiple visions, his response in verse 28 of chapter 1 is when he sees it, and when I saw it, I fell on my face. Or another example in Daniel chapter 7, when he's given a vision of the Lord as he interacts with the heavens. And verse 15, as for me, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions in my head alarmed me. Or in verse 28, Daniel, my thoughts greatly alarmed me, and my color changed. All he knows is he's experiencing something in the heavenlies, and this is why again and again when an angel visits someone, you know this, when an angel visits someone, one of the first things out of their mouth are, fear not. There is this trepidation about the heavenlies, and rightfully so, because we are absolutely separate. Because God is separate from us, and he is not tarnished by sin at all. And yet you're telling me Jacob just had a dream that there's a ladder that connects these two worlds. That seems counter to the narrative we've been experiencing in Genesis so far. Well, the reason it's not terribly counterintuitive is if we slow down, we remind ourselves that the plan, though, is to actually reunite these things. So it seems to be unique. So in Genesis 12, the whole plan was to start in recognizing that Abraham, within him is the hope for the nations, to bless the nations, that things will be made right again. In a poetic way, the Psalms actually say it like this, referring to heaven and earth coming together in chapter 85 and verses 10, 11, and 12. It says, steadfast love and faithfulness meet, righteousness and peace kiss each other. Faithfulness springs up from the ground, and righteousness looks down from the sky. Yes, the Lord will give what is good, and our land will yield its increase. Maybe that's too poetic. Let's go back to Isaiah. About 60 chapters after he receives this vision and he sees the Lord, he responds in Isaiah 65, verses 17 through 25. It says, for behold, this is now God talking. Here's his plan to unite the two together. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind. No more shall be heard is the sound of weeping or the cry of distress. And verse 20 says, no more shall there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not fill out his days. And verse 21, it goes on to say, they shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They shall not build another and inhabit, not plant and another eat. Verse 23 goes on to say, they shall not labor in vain or bear children for calamity, for they shall be the offspring of the blessed of the Lord, and their descendants with them. Verse 24 goes on to say, before they call, I will answer. This is all our future. Before they call, I will answer. Before they yet are speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb will graze together. The lion shall eat straw like the ox, and the dust shall be for the serpent food. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, says the Lord. God is promising again and again and again. And if you want a perfect picture, it's found in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 14. It says, for the earth is filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. One day, God in his redemptive plan will say, do you know what it's like? Think of the sea real quick. The sea is like the earth. And I want you to think, how full of water is the sea? Well, it's completely full. That's what makes it the sea. That's how full the earth will be of my glory one day. One day, my glory will not just dwell up here. It will fill the earth, and you will see it. It will be tangible. I will bring these two things together. So how could it be? Enter into this space. You're an original reader. How could it be possible that there be such a separation from us because of sin, from heaven and earth because of sin, and yet God brings the two together? This is the $100 question. How on earth does Jacob's ladder exist? Should we go to Bethel right now? All of the Old Testament, as you read it, they're waiting for one word, you guys, one word, redemption. They're waiting for the restoration of what is broken, and this is coming through a Messiah who they do not know who he is. We know he's going to come from the family of Abraham. That's all we got. And then a man comes along after interacting with the man Jesus Christ, and he writes the Gospel of John. And in John chapter 1, we get a lot of answers, because in John chapter 1, some of you guys are aware, John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, that in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Okay, so what's that? Well, verse 14 explains that word that I was talking about, that is God, is flesh, right? So John wants to make early on that as a matter of fact, God has come to earth. He has dwelled in earth. He's taken on flesh. Well, in that same chapter, at the very end of the chapter, not at the beginning, that man who's taken on flesh, or that God who's taken on flesh, the man Jesus Christ, he's now walking with a guy named Philip, who he's called to be his disciple. So in calling him to be his disciple, he says, Philip, follow me. Philip immediately wants to go get someone he knows. And so he goes to find a man named Nathanael sitting underneath a fig tree in John chapter 1. Fig trees are, known historically as a place you'd go pray and meditate. He says, Nathanael, we found the guy that's going to restore all things. Let's go. There's some questions about, wait, what? Where's he from? So they get over there. And as Nathanael's approaching Jesus, Jesus sees him. Famously, old translation says, there's a man without guile, or there's no deceit in him. Nathanael immediately goes, how do you know who I am? And he says, listen, Nathanael, here's what I know. I saw you before Philip came to you. I saw you underneath the fig tree. Now you may think, well, maybe Jesus has good vision from miles away, or he was walking. That's not the case. Nathanael's amazed by this because he knows how separated he was from everyone else. He knows that in the time it would take, it would not be possible for him to see him, that Jesus somehow sees Nathanael in an amazing way. And so Nathanael's amazed by this, but if you can, look at John chapter 1, verse 50. Jesus answered him, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these. Nathanael, what? That's not amazing. Let me tell you what's amazing. Look at verse 51. And he said to him, truly, truly, I say to you, you ready? You ready? You will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man. And then suddenly it clicks, or as R.C. Sproul said at this moment, come on. Jesus is the ladder. Jesus is the way in which heaven and earth will be reunited. Jesus is what makes it possible. Though heaven is so far off, though God is so far off because of sin, he will reunite us back to our God. It is Jesus. Because I have John commentaries, no John commentary that I had when I looked at John chapter 1 did not immediately point back to Genesis 28. Suddenly we see that it is through Jesus and his work that angels can ascend and descend and interact with humanity. It's Jesus, through his work, that we are able to make petitions and go before the Father. It's because of Jesus that he ultimately is the way in which all things will be restored, including us and our God. Jesus is the great restorer. He is the Messiah we still haven't received in the book of Genesis. It's Jesus. Now, a little bit of my charismatic roots come out, and it's hard to shake them sometimes, okay? Occasionally I just wave a flag for no reason. It's a long story, okay? But it's hard for me not to see, in light of the fact that, believe this or not, Pella's not always the most organized church, okay? But we plan our preaching calendar out, right? So we know we're going through Genesis until the fall. We know that after that, we're going to pick up 1 Peter at some point. We're going to continue. We know what we're doing in 2026, a semblance of that. And sometimes we'll kind of pick a moment where we should cover this text on this day because of the church calendar. That's sometimes what happens. But not this time. We're just going through Genesis, and it just so happens that we land on Genesis 28, about Jacob's ladder, being reminded that Jesus is ultimately how heaven and earth will be reunited, and us with our Father will be reunited as we go into what is historically called Holy Week. It's crazy that we will enter into this week as Christians, billions of us all around the world, and we will see the way in which Jesus unites heaven and earth. We will see how Jesus is the ladder or the staircase to heaven. We will see what Jesus accomplishes on Friday. Then we will see what he does in raising from the dead on Sunday, that he is ultimately the great uniter. And so I want to just encourage you, in light of the truth that you already know, there's three things that I think might be helpful for you going into this week that might be uncomfortable or comfortable or used to. The first one is I want to invite you, if you feel so inclined, to fast with me from Friday to Sunday this year. And that could be all of Friday or after the Good Friday service, whatever it is, until after church on Sunday or when you wake up on Sunday. Again, I don't want Pella, I say this every single year when I invite you into this, I don't want Pella to get sued. So if you don't think you can fast, don't fast, okay? I think for the most part, most in this room can make it 36 to 48 hours. I think you can do that. And if there's ways that I can be helpful in that, I would love to navigate that with you. But I would encourage you to do that. The second thing is, I'd mentioned before that we have these Good Friday services, and I had said already 100 times that Good Friday is one of my favorite services, and the reason is, on the church calendar, when we get to Friday, there should be this sense of failure. And so I want to encourage you to come to the Good Friday service, whichever one you go to, and we're going to enter into space and being led only by verses and the art of music, walking us through the passion of Christ. And there will be no communion, there will be no celebration, but we will, like Christians before us for the last 2,000 years, we will be reminded that in that moment, the disciples lost all hope. That we are to be pitied amongst all people. Enter into that space. That we have lost it all. We put all of our eggs into that basket, no pun intended, we put all of our eggs into that basket of hoping that Jesus really is God, but he died. He died. A Messiah doesn't die. The great uniter of heaven and earth doesn't die. And so we'll leave here people of despair, rightfully so. And then the last thing, I don't know what's going to happen on Sunday morning. I think parking is going to be a disaster. We're meeting at the Sunny Slope Mission. If you're not aware, you show up here. We will not be here on that's next week. I don't know if the neighbors are going to call the police because of the sound. I have no idea. We're figuring out, this is the first time we've done this as a staff in that place, and so we're still navigating all the details that we can. I would encourage you to carpool, but we're doing what we can. I don't know what to expect, but what I do know is, though it might rain, I don't know, okay, which it's scheduled to rain, so maybe pray against that, but I know we can sing. I know we can celebrate. I know we can read his word. I know as we look at Revelation chapter 1 that he is who he said he was. And as a matter of fact, Friday was but a blip on the map. We didn't lose. That's what I know. And so we come to Sunday with elation. We come on Sunday, Easter, celebrating what Jesus has accomplished. Those movements this week can be helpful for us. And I encourage you to enter into that space. Let's pray.